So if you're tuning into this episode of DSP on Connected here at Bull, or maybe you haven't touched it yet for whatever reason, well, this is the right episode for you because we're going to dive deep into Alpine solutions that have DSP in mind and how they might be your first step towards being an expert. We've got our product expert, Gord Brown, joining us from Gentech, and we're going to dive right in. This is CMA Connected, brought to you by SiriusXM, and it starts now. All right, welcome back to the show. We've got our man Gord Brown joining us today from Gentech, the Canadian distributor for Alpine. Gord, welcome to Connected. This is going to be a fun one because to this day, we are 2026, and to many folks out there, whether they're consumers or dealers, DSP is still maybe something they're not quite comfortable or even familiar with. And of course, we're going to be talking about Alpine products in particular, but I want to get into the current status of affairs, right? So the way I break this down, right, is there are three types of dealers out there. Businesses that do car audio stuff, right? You've got what I call the early adopters, which are those, shops that have been on DSP since the day it came out and they've evolved with it and it's part of their regular routine. It's what they do and they find success. Right. Then you've got the second group of, they've got into it in the last few years, they've practiced, they've put in the time, and now they're finding success. And, of course, some struggles, it's a learning curve, but they're actively, executing DSP projects. I think today's episode is going to focus more on the third group. And this is an important group because we want, as an industry, for everybody to elevate and get to the right levels and offer the right solutions. And this group is the group that either hasn't necessarily, dove in and accepted the fact that DSP is here and it's a necessary thing, and they haven't found success with it. So, having said that, your thoughts. Is my analysis accurate in your opinion?
Hey, Glenn. It's great to be on the show. At the end of the day, DSP has been around for a very long time. And, the frustration I think that a lot of us see when it comes to DSP is just how long it takes to really understand what it's doing for you and how to do it. So I think that's the challenge, and where Alpine really came to the table with one of their DSPs, obviously in the last couple of years, was Optimate, which kind of made it easier. In fact, it became the easiest way to kind of start doing DSP right out of the gate. And I think that's really the key for us is to kind of get over that hump of the, kind of the undecided, because ultimately when it comes to integrating into factory systems, today, that's something that's kind of a luxury. In a couple of years, it's going to be the only way. Mm-hmm. So we really, really need to start figuring out as a core industry, we need to start working away from dash replacement and into integration.
Which is crazy to think about, because here we're talking about Alpine, one of the OGs in the source unit category, still making some of the best radios on the planet. But the truth of the matter is fitment. The newer vehicles are getting harder and harder to integrate into, and to a point where there may simply not be a solution, or a solution that makes sense financially. Some of these solutions do exist, but if you start adding up the ticket between the unit that works in there, the screen size, the features the client wants, the trim panel, the integration module, it adds up pretty quick. And, unfortunately, and I'll be the first to say this, sometimes that's a deterrent for a sale. Right? Customer comes in, maybe he hasn't put a sound system in his car in 20 years. And he's like, oh, I got my new ride and I want to get better sound. Remember, that's what he wants, better sound. We're going to circle back to that statement in a second. Mm-hmm. And then we have to tell him that it's going to cost him like $2,000 to get a radio in. Like, it's a tough sell sometimes, right? So I agree with you, Gord. We're talking about equipping our experts in the field to understand that the customer, what they want is better sound. Your job as a dealer is to be the expert and provide the solution to get them that better sound. No, having that said, you mentioned Optimate. Now, guys, if you haven't heard of Optimate yet, go to cmanetworks.com, Google it. We've done tons of videos and coverage on the whole Optimate system. It's a multi-channel, it's DSP, it's easy to set up. What we're talking about today is the business end of things, right? So when you're thinking about it, the first question you got to ask yourself, although the customer comes in saying, I want to change my radio, the question is, do you really? Right? So I think we need to talk about that.
And it's not always the question is, do I want to change my radio? As you mentioned earlier, most customers come in asking for better sound. we've just, as an industry, the go-to has always been to change the radio first. And number one, it gave you the best bang for the buck when it came to doing your business. But it also was, the kind of that stepping stone, the kind of the point of entry getting into a car that allowed you to then say, do you want the fries and the soft drink with that? Can I get speakers in there? Do I do an amplifier? Do I do a subwoofer? I don't think that there's anything wrong with that philosophy, except for the fact that dashboards are getting harder and harder to work on. So it's just a bit of an evolution to what we've been doing as an industry all along anyhow, is really just taking out, kind of the dashboard as the starting point, and now just going to amplification as your starting point. And, like if you look at what we used to do with, line out converters and, some small integration product, and number one problem is always noise. And it's because, some factory systems have very low output, some have very high output. So with today's technology on a lot of these devices, we can kind of overcome that. And because that's built into most of the DSP front end, when you're using high level inputs to integrate to that factory system with, Alpine has up to 30 volts of input. You can hammer straight out of the factory amplifier if you want, straight into those inputs, and allow the DSPs to handle all the mixing and combining of your high channels, your mid channels, your low channels, your sub channels, wrap them all together and give you 2 channels of audio to work through that DSP.
Well, and here's the thing. What we've identified right here, Gord, is the customer wants better sound. He, as well as us, the industry, have been conditioned to go step one, default, change my radio, right? Because that's the gateway, a stepping stone, like you said, to other stuff, right? What comes later. But the truth is, many of the cars today, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto is a major feature that everybody wants. Many vehicles, especially the newer vehicles, already have them built in. So it's no longer a low-hanging fruit to be able to upgrade a customer to CarPlay, for example. So if that's not the case, they're there for better sound. So here's the thing. Is radio replacement even an option? And if it's not, don't make that like a negative thing. I would flip that and say, fantastic. You want better sound? We have a solution for you. And the customer's like, okay, what radio am I changing? Actually, great news. We don't even have to change your radio. If you flip it in a positive light, I think it changes the conversation altogether.
Yeah. And from an installation perspective, it's often easier to go straight to amplification and ultimately speakers if it goes that way, because from that perspective, you're not trying to unbolt a dash. For those of us familiar, if you're trying to do something like a Jeep, I think it's like 48 volts to get that dash apart.
Yeah, exactly.
That adds more of a time component than it would be if you were to do, kind of an interface beyond the dash, get your speaker level inputs to the DSP units, and then do your outputs from there, whether you're going straight back into factory speakers or doing a full speaker subwoofer replacement. It's irrelevant at that point, because you now have the tuning tool that allows you to get more power and more precise control over what that customer's sound is. Because if that factory system has usually bass and treble controls,
forget about the fader. There's a fader. There's always a fader.
Absolutely. And usually you want to keep it in the front just so it sounds better. But at the end of the day, when you're still working with 2 channels in most cases, and in those cases, that's where you really want to be able to dial it in, get some better sound, and get some better power.
You know what it is? I've spoken to dealers, and a lot of people relate DSP to high-end tuning. Unfortunately, that's how they perceive DSP. I would like to refer to it moving forward as an opportunity to integrate into a vehicle and provide better sound, because really that's what it is. The DSP side of it, the processing side of it, is kind of like the latter half of the process. The first process is getting sound better. What does that mean? That means getting a good signal. That means being able to drive better power to your factory speakers, right? And then for most people, that's already stage 1 level up. Why did we change our radios to begin with? We didn't have CarPlay and stuff to deal with back in the day. We wanted better sound, right? So better sound should always be the first criteria, is what I'm saying. Having said that, I've heard a lot of objections, and the reason I'm bringing these objections to you, Gord, is we're going to see how the Alpine DSP selection addresses the following concerns that I have. So one of the first ones I hear all the time is that my client doesn't have the budget for DSP. Your response?
Well, budget's always a concern no matter what you're replacing in a car. But let's face it, even if you're working with a $500, $600, $700 radio, that's not where the budget ends, because now you have to interface with all those safety features when the car comes factory equipped with a camera and steering wheel controls and features like your heated seats and your HVAC controls all integrated into that factory dash. If you're pulling that radio out, then ultimately when you're putting in a new radio, you're looking at like an ADS type interface for Maestro. You're doing steering wheel controls that may or may not be separate depending on the device you're using. You may be able to use some of the other interfaces that are available in the market, but they all add up. So at the end of the day, between that and the amount of labor that's involved in dismantling and reassembling a lot of the dashes now, that $700 radio install can quickly become $1,200 to $1,500. And quite frankly, that's at the exact same price point where an Optimate gets you. And
okay, there you go.
Your integration's right there.
So it's a myth. The myth is if the customer is ready to change the radio and you've done the job in explaining changing your radio will cost this much. However, I might have a better option for you if you understood what we're talking about here today. Budget
right.
shouldn't even be part of the conversation. Here's another good one for you. And I'm not throwing any particular dealers on the bus because I got a lot of friends like you do, Gord, that have been doing this for a long time. But you know as well as I do, there's some old cats in here have literally said, I've been doing car stereo for 25 years and I've never had to do DSP.
Well, valid point, and a separate part is I've been doing it for 25 years. I already know what I'm doing. I don't need to have something auto-tuning for me. So let's address what you asked for first. If you've been doing it for a long time and you haven't had to use it in the past, you're lucky, because at the end of the day, that means you've probably been changing speakers, putting in an amplifier and calling it a day. Great if that's you want to kick the customer out of the garage and never see them again, because at the end of the day you've kind of dead-ended that sale. Whereas with the DSP sale, you're still using around the same amount of budget that you may have been doing for an amplifier upgrade or factory replacement, but now you're integrating and giving better sound, better detail, and now the customer has a path that says, okay, I've integrated that amplifier. Now I do want better speakers. I do want a subwoofer. I do want to have more, and allows you to use time as an opportunity to get that car back in the bay. So there's a lot of solutions in there. You can back up your settings, for example. So when the customer inevitably goes in there and blows everything up, you can get the back into the shop. You can do, an hour of labor and have that thing up and running again in 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, we're going down a slope here that I think is going to hopefully open the eyes of many dealers, but we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I got more challenges, I guess I'll put in front of you as far as DSP, but we're going to get to the fun part, which is talking about the solution. So we're here with Gord Brown. We're talking Alpine. We're talking DSP. We'll see you after the break.
Hey, Paul with SiriusXM here. And with 3 easy steps, you can maximize your business. Number 1, make sure you have the current promotional material up. Understand the offer. Make sure your team knows it. 2, have a unit on display. Set the presets to different genres so you can recommend and play the music that your customer listens to. And number 3, think about this. Most vehicles you're replacing the head unit with already has a SiriusXM tuner in it. So adding it just requires an antenna adapter, a SiriusXM tuner. It's a 30-second install and you're done. So there it is, guys. 3 easy steps to maximize every sale this season with SiriusXM.
All right, so just before the break, we're talking about some of the obstacles or arguments or whatever you want to call them, excuses maybe, from dealers about getting into DSP. And Gord, you've presented some pretty insightful answers that are real time. That this is what's happening. The products have become so good. They become such easy tools to work with compared to the first generation of when DSP kind of just started creeping into our industry. But now there's lots of options, and Alpine's really invested a lot of time into creating these type of solutions. One of the things is there's a misconception that setting up a DSP is simply too time consuming, and therefore I have to charge my customer too much, which therefore means he's not going to be a happy customer.
Yeah, that's true. And that's the argument we've heard, especially in the past when, it was time consuming. It was a lot of manual calculation. You guys might remember some of the tools we used to provide with Alpine with the tape measure that measured in time distances. And we used that to measure to each speaker and then manually have to go in and click into the DSP and figure that out for time correction, for example. today it's pretty darn easy as far as Optimate goes. I mean, this thing is you finish doing all your install, you put it into calculation mode, and you pretty much use your phone, whether it's an Android device or an iPhone, and move the phone around the car for about 2.5 to 3 minutes, depending on what the system detects as challenges to fix. And it shows you in real time as it's measuring and fixing the car. And within that couple of minutes, it gives you a complete analysis of what it measured and shows you what it's correcting, and even allows you at that point to just kind of quickly dial in using your finger on the phone kind of thing to dial in the equalization you prefer to hear. And it just changes in real time so you can hear those differences. You can lock that in and you're done. It takes 5 minutes to get a DSP from Optimate set up.
I'm going to back you up on this, Gord, because when someone tuning into this, listening, you say how easy this is, and it takes like 5 minutes. Case in point, we did CMA Expo back in Toronto in the spring, and I don't know this year, last year, but we had Eric from Alpine there, and he demonstrated using the mobile app and the phone, as you discussed, a real-time tune of a vehicle. No joke.
In a large environment, with like people all over the place.
All over the place, in person, real time, done.
And done. And again, like everybody's got their flavor, right? So at the end of the day,
the salt and pepper is always at the end, right?
Exactly. So you can go in and dial it in, but it gives you, what used to take us hours, and I mean hours and hours in some cases, to truly dial in like a 6, 8, 10, 12 channel system. Every single component has some influence. So you're trying to deal with every single speaker in that case individually and trying to dial it in. So again, your baseline used to take hours, and now you're getting it in 5 minutes. So if baseline is all you need and you're happy with that as from an installation perspective, again, you're no different than the 5 minutes you take to dial the little gains and crossover points on the end of an amplifier anyways when you're doing that initial tune. The only difference is you're taking the little screwdriver out of your hands to try and get into those little spots and just doing it through the phone.
Exactly.
And in that same amount of time that it takes you to normally set up a 5-channel amplifier, you can do that in DSP time with an Optimate.
And what's crazy is the more you do it, the easier it gets. I mean, you just get into this rhythm and it's repeatable. It's the same process over and over. Once you have all the things connected and everything done, do the process. And that's what I want people to understand. Like any other skill, it's about practice. It's about familiarity. What Alpine's done here is simplified the system to a point where if your objection was, well, I don't want to invest in all this gear and equipment to do this. What equipment? Everybody has a phone. All right. They've even thought of that. Right. So now you have a simple process. You've got great product that Alpine's going to deliver great sound, but they've simplified the process and even mitigated the type of equipment that you need to do said process. Honestly, there's no more excuses. To be honest with you, there is no more excuses to this. If you want to get great sound in a vehicle and you can't change the radio, man, this is going to be your go-to setup. Now, if I'm a dealer, I've been listening to us talk back and forth, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time I look into. I'm starting to think in my head all these jobs I said no to, or the jobs that the guy came in for a radio and he just said, no, I can't spend that on a radio. And really going back to the top of the conversation, Gordon, we're talking about getting the customer what he wants, and that what he wants is better sound. So circling back to that, what would be the next steps from a dealer perspective? Again, talking about that dealer that hasn't quite embraced DSP yet.
Well, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it really does depend on what the customer's better sound is, right? So in some cases, it may be, when you qualify them, that they might want a better radio, and that's where you start. Not taking that, kind of tool out of the tool, taking that tool out of our tool belt here. This is kind of radio 101. That's the first step. But you got to keep in mind that's going to get harder and harder with all the cars on the road that don't have that ability for us. And look, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road when, the cars are just going to get harder to integrate with. So, ultimately this gives us a different tool. It allows us to show the customer how we can continue to get them better sound without necessarily changing that front end. When it comes to DSP, to your point, some of us don't have as much flexibility or as much knowledge or as much experience using DSP. So Optimate from Alpine is probably the easiest way to get started. The cool thing is, as you set it up, it shows you what it did. So if you really want to dive into it and kind of explore in the software afterwards, you can look at it and see what did it just tune for me. And now you get some experience to understand what was changed. And then if you want to grow or you want to do more power, for example, you can, Optimate is an 8-channel processor with 8 channels of amplification. Right. But maybe you get into a more complex car, something that's got maybe mids and tweets and a mid bass in the front, mids and tweets in the back, a pair of subs, center channel. You can expand and get up into like Alpine Status Processor, for example, that has 12 channels of input and up to 14 different channels of output. So you can really dial that one in. It needs a little bit more of a solution because it's not optimized to be able to run in and use your phone to tune the car. But you need that experience from what you've done with Optimate to know how to take those next steps.
Well, what you're saying here is if you're thinking about getting into DSP, the great entry point is getting familiar with the Optim system. I think that's a great entry point. It gets you in, it gets you integrated, it gets you tuned easy, you get a process. As you get more comfortable with that, then you can look at stepping up to the higher end, offerings from Alpine, such as the Status, for that more audiophile customer, maybe a little bit more complex system, more channels, so on and so forth. But I wouldn't worry about that yet, especially if you're just haven't got into it yet and you're not familiar with it. I strongly recommend checking out the Optim one. On this channel, I get to talk to all different brands. There's a lot of great DSP solutions. I mean, the DSP category in itself has grown tremendously. It's become so much more important as a whole. What Alpine has done is introduce a solution that is user-friendly, that is repeatable, and is very efficient. And that's what I like about it, right? At the end of the day, don't be scared of DSP. That's number one. Number two, don't say no to DSP just because you don't understand it. There are solutions now that are easier than before. And number three, the customer doesn't come in asking for DSP. The customer comes in asking for better sound. If you can do a radio, by all means, sell them a radio. But if you can't do a radio, it's not a bad thing. It's just that it's another direction, another solution to get them what they want. I'll leave you the last word. What message do you have for dealers when you're tuning into this about DSP and about Alpine at large?
Yeah, hey, listen, we've really covered a lot of the topics today as far as DSP goes. But I think to what you originally said, the biggest concern that most retailers have is the amount of time it takes. And so it's not about selling the DSP or selling the amplification part. It's how much time it takes afterwards. And, a lot of shop owners and a lot of managers are concerned about labor time. You don't have to worry about that with Optimate because it's, like I said, the amount of tuning it takes is probably no different than it would take to just set up your traditional amplifiers anyways. So I would take a crack at this, understand that, that's a 6 by 50 plus 150 by 2 to run your subwoofers or your mid basses if you're going to go with a separate amplifier for your subwoofers. Again, with DSPs, you can really dial that in any way you want. So at the end of the day, it's just really important about understanding the flexibility and the integration factor, to be able to expand on a factory system. The last thing you ever want to do is turn a car away because you think the dash is too hard to work on. Bring that car in, give the customer what they wanted, which is better sound.
Couldn't said it better myself. Gordon, I want to thank you for taking the time today, coming into the show. Guys, if you like what you see here, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like us on social channels. You're watching CMA Connected, brought to you by SiriusXM. I'm your host, Ben Wu. Until next time, we connect.